Greetings, and welcome to another episode of Haunted History with Sherry Brake. That's me. In each episode, we will venture down the not-so-straight path of the paranormal, exploring dark history and the oddness of life and death. We'll cover subjects such as folklore, hauntings, cryptids, mythology, witchcraft, haunted travel, and dark history, of course. This episode is called Mothman More. Our first episode of the season takes us to George Washington's favorite place. At least that's what he told a few people back in his day. Welcome to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, home of the 1774 Battle of Point Pleasant, home of the Men in Black, home to the graves of Mad Ann Bailey and Shawnee Chief Cornstalk, home to a town that has suffered the tragic collapse of the Silver Bridge back in 1967. It's a town that saw the historic Ohio River floodwaters rise up and sweep through town in January of 1937. It's a town that has had more than its fair share of UFO reports. This is a town that sits on a beautiful point where two rivers meet, the Great Kanawha and the mighty Ohio River. And finally, it's the home of the Mothman statue, the Mothman Museum, and it was the beginning of hundreds of documented Mothman sightings, beginning back in 1966. It's said that mighty Shawnee Chief Cornstalk allegedly cursed the town of Point Pleasant, but more on that later. Tonight's podcast is being recorded at Fraser's Cabin, which sits on a cute little hillside within 2 miles of historic Point Pleasant. It's a cabin that is cozy and decorated with cryptid decor, and it's also a cabin that was a filming location for a Discovery Channel series called Murders in the Heartland, Season 5, Episode 12. So really, what can go wrong tonight with the recording of that in this cabin? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. So for those of you that aren't too familiar with the Mothman phenomena, back in 1975, a book came out by John Keel, and it was called The Mothman Prophecies. This book eventually led into the 2002 movie starring Laura Linney and Richard Gere. And if you're like me, you love Richard Gere. Any movie, I'm going to watch it. So, of course, I watched it. And as I watched it, I knew what I was seeing. Parts of it were historic, but I also knew that Hollywood had their hand in some of the aspects of filming. So in 2003, just 1 year after that movie came out, I made my first trip to Point Pleasant, and I fell in love. I wandered the streets of Point Pleasant, and I talked to people, I shopped, I visited some of the historic sites, and later that night when I was leaving town, it dawned on me. This little river town reminded me of a cross between the Twilight Zone and Mayberry. It was quirky, it was cool, it was down home, it was fun, but it had a vibe. There's a feeling, and I still feel it to this very day. When I walk down Main Street, you can almost feel it on the atmosphere. There's something here. There's something here in this town. In 2005, I led my very first official tour to Point Pleasant. I had started Haunted Heartland Tours, which is my tour company, which I still own and operate. And I had thought, hey, a lot of people have seen that Mothman Prophecy movie. Why not work out some kind of a tour, leaving out of Canton, Ohio, getting people on a bus, coming down here, and exploring what this town has to offer, the history and the mystery. And I did that for a couple of years, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and people really enjoyed the fact that we could come in town and we could eat at Harris's Diner. We could go up into the TNT area and venture inside one of the igloos there and walk the streets of town. And it was a great time. I really enjoyed it. In 2014, 2015, and 2016, I had the pleasure of being a speaker at the annual Mothman Festival here in town, and it draws thousands of people from all over the world. I've had the chance to be a speaker among the likes of Lauren Coleman, Susan Shepard, Bill Brock, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, Ken Gerhard, Stan Gordon, Jody Cook, Nick Redfern, George Dudding, John and Tim Frick, Chad Lambert, and many, many others. And I have met friends at the festival that I have till this very day. So hoping to be back there sometime again for a speaker. It would be wonderful to be back in town and to do that and to really showcase all that this town has to offer. A little mix of Mayberry and a little mix of the Twilight Zone. While we had touched briefly on the subject of the author of the Mothman Prophecies, John Keel, I wanted to read you a couple paragraphs of what was featured in Fate magazine. The edition is September 2007, and this is from John Keel himself. Enter the Mothman. In November of 1966, 4 young people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported a chilling encounter with a 7-foot-tall monster with glowing red eyes and a 10-foot wingspan. The press labeled it Mothman, and during the next year, more than 100 West Virginians would see it. If it had just been another 10-foot-tall hairy monster, I would have ignored the report. After all, Bigfoot sightings were super abundant. But the West Virginia critter had wings, could take off straight up like a helicopter, and was kind of pursuing automobiles at 90 miles an hour. In short, he was my kind of weirdy. I found Point Pleasant was a quiet little town of 6,300 people, dozens of churches, and no public bars. The Mothman sightings had taken place in a desolate World War II ammunition dump on the edge of town. More intriguing, there had been countless UFO sightings up and down the Ohio River all year. Eerie diamond brilliant lights passed over Point Pleasant every night at 8:30 on a regular schedule. I decided to do something that the Air Force and the loudmouthed UFO buffs had never thought of doing. I decided to investigate the situation instead of just holding conversations with the witnesses. Within a few days, a much bigger picture began to evolve. The region was not only haunted by strange aerial lights, the homes of the witnesses were plagued with poltergeists and other supernatural phenomena. Television sets were burning out at an alarming rate. Telephones were going crazy, ringing at all hours of the day and night, with no one on the other end. Some people were getting calls from mysterious strangers speaking a cryptic language. Black Cadillacs bearing Oriental-looking gentlemen were cruising the Black Hills of West Virginia. Mothman assumed minor importance as I uncovered all of these other things. I had been investigating psychic manifestations all over the world for years, and I recognized the pattern here. Some UFOs were directly related to the human consciousness, just as ghostly apparitions are often the product of the recipient's mind. There are deeply rooted psychic and psychological factors in the UFO phenomenon, and sudden appearance of a light in the sky triggers and releases the human energy that stimulated seemingly supernatural events. We cannot define the exact nature of those lights, but we can catalog the many manifestations that accompany them, and we can demonstrate how identical manifestations occur in many different frames of reference. End quote. Let's explore a little bit with the Mothman in folklore. Specifically, let's talk first about local Ohio River Valley legends. So there was a legend I had heard years ago about a man who fell asleep along the banks of the mighty Ohio River on one extremely chilly night. When he woke up the next morning, he found himself covered from head to toe with hundreds of moths. Apparently, the heat of his body attracted the moths, and they covered him from head to toe. When the first rays of the sun hit his body, he turned into a Mothman. Now, that's a fascinating legend, but a bit far-fetched for many researchers, of course. Going back even farther to the late Greco-Egyptian period, 332 BC to 395 AD, we have a headless, demonic-like figure who has red eyes placed into his upper shoulders, with no head. Almost like the Mothman reports described back in 1966 and 1967 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. This demon of sorts was known as a sky god. He was lord of the desert and of warfare. He was also known as the god of chaos. He is known as the Egyptian Seth. Various descriptions are found in mythology of Seth, spelled S-E-T-H, but you can't help but see the possible comparison of god of chaos, sky god, and those red eyes being just like Mothman. Now, of course, there were also bird theories about this creature that was seen above Point Pleasant. Some claim that it was a migratory crane. There was a Dr. Robert Smith at West Virginia University that told the Mason County Police Department that they thought that this creature that everybody was seeing was simply a sandhill crane. Now, there's, problems with that theory because it's not very common to have a sandhill crane in West Virginia, because typically those are found in Florida, Georgia, and the Mississippi River Valley. So that kind of throws a little bit of a hole in that theory. Going over to Cornwall, England, we have reports of the Owl Man. These reports started initially way back when two boys first sighted this owl-like, man-like creature in 1926. More reports started 10 years after that initial sighting, just like in the Mothman sighting. This Owl Man sightings were centered around one location specifically in Cornwall, the Mountain Church, which was built back in 13th century. Locals there referred to the Owl Man as the Owl Man of Mountain Wood. If we go back to Scottish folklore and history, April 15th, 1746, finds us with a massive battle at Culloden Moor, which is near Inverness, Scotland. I've been there several times myself. Back in 1746, this battle was a horrific battle. It was between the British troops who engaged with the Highlanders, who were supporters of the Jacobean cause under Bonnie Prince Charlie. He was the Stuart prince who sought to recover the British throne. Well, the story goes that on the eve of the battle, which ended the Jacobite cause, several men in the Scottish camp saw a large apparition flying through the air. It appeared to even hover at times above the battlefield. The men who were witness to the sight said that it resembled a large bird with the head of a man, glowing red eyes, and leathery bat-like wings. The men later named it the Scree. This frightening apparition was also seen by a very level-headed, respected general, Lord George Murray. The specter soon disappeared, but after the slaughter of the Highlanders the next day in battle, it was thought to be a precursor or a warning of great death. November 15th, 1966. Couples see man-sized bird, creature, something. Two Point Pleasant couples told police that their car was followed about midnight by a bird-like creature, 6 to 7 feet tall with red eyes and a 10-foot wingspan. This is reading from the original newspaper clipping. Steve Millett and Roger Scarberry told Mason County Sheriff's deputies that they were riding with their wives near the McClintock Wildlife Reserve when they first encountered the thing. Millett said it was large, measuring as much as 6 or 7 feet, was gray in color, and its eyes were 2 inches in diameter. He said the eyes glowed red when the car headlights were put on them near an abandoned power plant. Then Millett said the thing took off, making a flapping noise, and traveled at high speeds at about 100 miles an hour. Millett added it was a clumsy runner. I'm a hard guy to scare, Scarberry told newsmen, but last night I was for getting out of there. If I'd seen it myself, I wouldn't have said anything about it, but there were 4 of us who saw it, Scarberry said. After the first sighting, the men said the thing glided along the car until their car reached West Virginia Route 62. Then it disappeared. The 4 drove to downtown Point Pleasant. When we turned around, there it was again. It almost seemed to be waiting on us, Millett said. They went to the city limits and saw the creature again. When the car headlights were put on it, it scurried into a field and disappeared. It's apparently afraid of light, Millett said. Sheriff Deputy Millard Holstead, investigating the report, said he was not discounting the story. He emphasized that none of the 4 had been drinking. Even Holstead said he saw a cloud of dust near the old power station, and it could have been the bird. Residents were upset, and the speculation was that the thing lives in one of the abandoned boilers of the power plant. There are pigeons in the building, but not in one, Millett said, theorizing the thing that they saw might live in it. In Susan Shepard's book, Cry of the Banshee, she speaks about the possible first sighting of this moth-like creature. An unusually tall figure stood in the middle of the road ahead of a woman who drove her father along Route 2 in the Chief Cornstalk hunting grounds of Point Pleasant in 1960 or 61. As they got closer, the driver slowed the car. The 2 apprehensive witnesses saw a fleshy gray creature with a human body, but much taller than any man. The woman later reported what happened next. A pair of wings unfolded from its back, and they practically filled the whole road. It almost looked like a small airplane. Then it took off straight up, disappearing out of sight in seconds. We were both terrified. I stepped on the gas and raced out of there. We talked it over and decided not to tell anybody about it, because who would believe us anyway? One of the other possible sightings, the early sightings of Mothman that I find truly intriguing, is that happened about 50 miles from Point Pleasant in the Elk River Valley in the town of Clendenin, West Virginia. Saturday, November 12, 1966, Kenneth Duncan was digging a grave for a family member, and as was common for many people, even back in the 60s, was the fact that there were other family members helping to dig this grave. 5 men were there. On this early Saturday morning, there was a commotion above the trees, and what did they see but a brownish human form flying among the trees? Robert Lovejoy, William Poole, Andrew Godbey, Emil Gibson, and Kenneth Duncan were there. Only a couple of the men saw this creature, whatever it was, flying above the trees, and it lasted about 1 minute. Now, I find it curious because I've been to that cemetery before. I have walked across the Kuntz Cemetery, high on the hilltop, and let me tell you what, of the 2 times that I've been there, I get goosebumps. I'm not sure what the vibe is in that cemetery, but it truly, truly is an intriguing location. And I find it just fascinating that these men were there innocently digging a grave on that Saturday morning and possibly saw one of the first recorded sightings of Mothman. There have been multiple sightings or alleged sightings of Mothman throughout the years that have come to light. There was one that dates back to November 1st, 1966, when National Guardsmen at the Armory on Camp Conley Road near Point Pleasant saw a large, brown, man-shaped figure on the limb of a nearby tree. Basically, you set off a wave of sightings throughout West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio. Apart from Point Pleasant and Clendenin, these strange bird-like creatures were popping up everywhere. There have been hundreds of documented sightings. Another one was on November 27th in 1966, when Connie Carpenter was chased by Mothman and ended up suffering from conjunctivitis, or pink eye, of the eyes. This side effect is also reported by many UFO witnesses. So what are some of the theories about where Mothman could have come from? Where was its origination? Some will say that it's a harbinger of cataclysmic events. Others might speculate that it's an alien life form with connections to the UFOs and possibly even the Men in Black. More people probably think that there's a practical explanation, like it's a hoax or the product of mass hysteria. Some people believe that Mothman comes from another dimension, or it might be a mutated human. Some say it could come from outer space. Others might believe that it comes from the depths of hell. Whatever the case, the Mothman continues to pop up in both pop culture and real life. And it's one of the more intriguing examples of modern American folklore. I find it fascinating. From the very first day that I set foot on the ground at Point Pleasant, that little town, that little river town, had a hold of my heart. The intrigue of the Mothman, the history, Chief Cornstalk, the Battle of Point Pleasant, which, as a matter of fact, is celebrating its 250th anniversary this year in October of 2024. All of this rich history and mystery and intrigue really just sucks you in. So at the end of the day, we can all agree from all of these reports with Mothman that something unusual did happen. Most would be in agreement that it was bipedal, meaning 2 feet. It averaged height-wise 7 to 10 foot tall, and humanoid in its features. Whatever this thing is, creature, mythological monster, a figment of people's imaginations, we'll probably never know. But I can tell you this, I will continue to go back to Point Pleasant and explore and research and talk to people, because there is something there. Where there's smoke, there's typically a fire. During the recording of this podcast in Point Pleasant, I had a wonderful time staying at this cool Airbnb cabin just 2 miles from downtown Point Pleasant, less than 2 miles from the Mothman statue and the Mothman Museum. And this place is adorable. It sits on a little over 3 acres. It's got its own walking trail. It's just so quaint. You get deer in the backyard. Such a cool place to stay. Found it on Airbnb. It is called Fraser's Cabin. And I highly suggest and recommend this place. If you're in town exploring, maybe if you're coming in to do one of my haunted history walking tours in Point Pleasant, this would be a great place for you to headquarter out of. It is fabulous. And I want to thank Denise for having me stay there. If you guys are like into quirky places, this would be an interesting place to add to your list, because it was featured in the TV series Murder in the Heartlands. And it's also going to be featured in an upcoming documentary called the Point Pleasant tapes. So if you get a chance, check it out. Fraser's Cabin, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Haunted History with me, Sherry Brake. Interested in my events, programs, ghost tours, and international tours? Please check out my website at www.hauntedhistory.net. I'm on Instagram as Riverstix, RIVERSTX, and please check out my various Facebook pages under Sherry Brake or Haunted Heartland Tours. I've been investigating the paranormal and researching all things odd and intriguing for over 30 years. My love for the paranormal has resulted in over a dozen books being published in the last 20 years. I own Haunted Heartland Tours, and I'm thrilled to be celebrating 24 years as a business owner who never sees her calling as a true job. My calling, you ask? To share my insight, stories, and my love of this crazy, dark, twisted, and intriguing subject we call haunted history. Ghost stories don't need to be made up. History is frightening enough, don't you agree? Until we meet again.